Okay, trying something new. I normally just do unboxing videos and then some videos maybe of the finished product, but we're just going to try and go over my process here. So today we are doing tests of the basic Mirelurks. These guys have already been washed. As these are resin, it's always best to wash them in warm water with a bit of washing up liquid, just to get rid of any mold release. Because when these come out, these are pressed into a mold. This is the injection piece, and there's a mold release additive that is coated sometimes, and so it can get remains in there, and then that can mess up your base coats and painting. So you want to especially make sure those are gone. They can even mess up glues. So we are going to go ahead and assemble these two regular Mirelurks, and then I'll also do a video on painting them up, all in preparation for testing the scheme to then put on this majestic lady, who is just phenomenally huge. I had to put it together. I was going to do a video on putting this one together, but I got too excited and I went through and already put her in her glory. I will be taking some Milliput and doing a bit of filling where the pieces connect. It's not terrible, but there's a little bit here due to an air bubble. There's some air bubble damage along the ridge here. You can kind of see maybe it's very small. So just very small amount of repairs to do. I'm not going to really bother with this underhang here or this bottom piece, because you'll never really see that. Once it's sitting on its base, that'll be hidden quite well. And honestly, the base coat will do a lot to kind of seal that. So this is her base, which is pretty chunky. But rather than waste time trying to paint her up first, despite the fact that I really want to, we're going to do the small guys. That way we can test the scheme before we do it on larger. And that's something I do with any project, really. If there's multiples, then I will generally test on the generics. So if I'm doing Space Marines, I'm not going to start painting a leader model. You want to paint all of the troops first and get your style down before you move on. So I'm just taking my clippers. I actually sprung for GW's clippers, and they're surprisingly really good. I wanted to see if they were worth the price, and so far they kind of are. I hate to say it. They make a really good cut. So we'll see how long they last, but I've been happy with them so far. Save your sprue pieces. If you can find something to grind these up, they make excellent debris to add to bases. So I keep all of my sprue bits, and I have a old, probably 50s or 60s metal meat grinder. It has to be metal. The ones you get today, a lot of them have a plastic screw, the screw being the part that actually turns and does the grinding. You need a metal one, otherwise the plastic screw, plastic versus plastic, if it's going to break plastic, it's going to break itself. Since these are resin, they're a bit softer, so you might be able, if you're just doing Wasteland Warfare sprues, to use them, but you probably don't want to risk it. You can probably find an old metal one at like a thrift shop or online somewhere, and they really are quite useful. Like I said, I've ground up tons of sprues, and I keep a bag full of the parts. And whenever I'm actually making terrain, which is another series of things I need to show off, I just go ahead and sprinkle those everywhere and makes for great rubble piles. So yeah, just cleaning off these base pieces. Again, trim them a little. And I'm doing up both of these at the same time, even though they're going to be the same scheme, because it can be easier to do two and kind of have a side-by-side comparison as you're working, just in case you may make a mistake on one and not really see it until later. So with these guys, one of the pipelines you can see comes up and connects very close to that shell. So what I'm going to do is kind of clip these first to free them up, and then so we've got two connection points, one internal here, so we can clip that, and then the other one here. We just want to make sure that we're clipping them. So when clipping, always, you want clippers that have a flat blade on one side and then the angle on the other. That way you can control where the flat is. I don't care about the angle being on the leftover sprue. I care about having the flat piece on the actual model. And you can see, like I said, these clip very well and very close. It also helps that the Fallout models tend to be not in a bad way, but loose on the sprues. They're very easy to peel off. A lot of models will be off the sprue in the box, and it's not a bad thing, it's just a thing. In fact, it can be very good because it allows you to very easily and with a minimum of cleanup get them ready. Now, like I said, I don't really care about this one, but I do need it to be a little clean so that it fits into the other model. And I was looking at this. This almost looks like an air bubble, but I'm betting that's just the shell. I've got some flashing here. So I just want to do a general cleanup before I move on to the next piece. Look for any more flashing. One thing I do when I clean these is I use a stiff bristled toothbrush, so plastic brush, to clean them a bit, and that also helps in removing a lot of the very loose flashing. So another reason to do that cleaning. And as we can see, he's got very good details on him. We've got his little face, his little tiny hands there. So that should be fun to get that detail in. And then for this one, so once again, this tab's going to be kind of hidden, so we don't have to be super clean with it. But we always want to make sure we're getting in there. And now, just to kind of clean up where I pulled this. And look for any flashing. You're generally going to find flashing in these angled recesses. It's just where the mold may have not been super tight, and so there's a little bit of leakage. That's all flashing is. It shouldn't obscure any kind of detail, and with this soft resin that they use, it comes off really easily. I'm not even cutting it, I'm scraping it more than anything. And then I think this needs to be flat. And then the other piece. And there, right at the corners. And anything I miss, I'll probably notice during the assembly phase and pick off there. Always good before you do your primer. No matter how many times you've cleaned it and how many times you're like, oh yeah, I'm sure I've got all of my flashing, before you put the primer on, give it another go, because I guarantee you, after you prime it, you will find more. Just seems to be the way it happens. The primer really shows up mold lines, flashing, that kind of thing. So after you do your initial primer coat, do not hesitate to review it and pull off any additional flashing. You can always repair the priming with either another light coat or brush on primer, anything like that, before you start applying your actual top coats. Better to spend the time then than realize after you've painted the entire model that, nope, that's not a claw, that's just a bit of flash. I will say though, with these Mirelurks, it's not going to beat as critical simply because they are clawed beasties. So it's kind of like painting Tyranids. Is it a flash or is it a little piece of bone? Either way, you're going to be fine. So let's just dry fitting all of these just to kind of get an idea how they look. So definitely do the... Okay, now I can do the big pieces first. I use super glue on all my stuff. I've been a fan of the Loctite stuff now purely because I don't like to buy large bottles of super glue. They always dry out before, especially if they're the more liquid kind. I like the gel because it's just easier to work with. It doesn't get everywhere. I've stuck my fingers together way too many times with the other stuff, and as I said, it dries up really quick. And this stuff is small enough, the applicator is easy, so I've kind of gotten used to using it now. Just apply a bit there. Also, the gel tends to dry pretty quick, I've noticed, and I'm a big fan of quick drying stuff. I know a lot of people like to use Gorilla Glue. Just be careful what type you're getting. I got one type before and it expanded when it dried, and I forget what I was using for. It wasn't anything super important, but still, if you don't want to use an expanding super glue on your miniatures, because obviously then you'll have a piece that's kind of broken all over. And these are... Of course, I'm breaking everything as I'm gluing it together, but that's fine. Realistically, I should let it sit for a bit. Let's see. Should get a bit more glue on this front leg section. Put some at the top there. And the bottom. The gel also does a good job of gap sealing, so if there are any... upside down. If there are any gaps, the gel will flow into it a bit better. So, there we have them. Now, these bases are not super detailed like some, so we've got rocks and dirt, so that's going to be pretty easy to paint. So I'm going to actually paint them on the base. The Queen, for example, there's a lot of detail on her base. I will not be gluing her to the base until the base is fully painted and she is base coated and ready to at least proceed with the detail work. Maybe I may do primary colors first. We will see. But yeah, so these guys should be pretty easy. Sometimes they have these little tiny holes where the other leg's supposed to go, so we will align those. I'm not going to put glue in them, but they'll sit pretty well. And there we go. So, should be pretty easy. I'm going to assemble the other one and then prime them, and we can start putting some color on them. For priming, I'm going to be I'm planning on doing contrast paints. A lot of people think they're kind of a cheat, but they're a lot of fun, and honestly, if I'm having fun painting, isn't that the whole point? So I'm going to be using GW contrast paints and contrast primer. I'm going to be using the Wraithbone for the underside, the more organic section there, and then Gray Seer over the top for the carapace and whatnot, and we will go from there. Okay, we are continuing our little painting tutorial on our favorite Mirelurks. You can't really see much, but he has been topped in gray and does have more of a white under. So that'll allow us to have lighter tones underneath where all of the fleshy bits are, as opposed to this top little harsh, hard part. So we are going to be doing just our base colors first, and for that we're going to be using Golem Flesh contrast for his fleshy bits underneath the hood, Agaros Dunes for the carapace itself, Skeleton Horde for any other kind of spiky claws and stuff like that, and finally Basilicum Gray for the chitinous arms and legs. So this is once again just the base kind of colors. I'm going to be painting them kind of quickly because the objective here is to keep them wet enough to blend a little bit. So what I'm going to do is start with the flesh and work my way out. So I've been really enjoying these contrast paints, as I said earlier, and the best way of applying them for this case anyway is in a nice heavy strokes here. The heavier the better, because it's going to go into all of these recesses and just be natural shading. We want to be careful about the claws that are on his underbelly here, and you can kind of start seeing some of the details as I start getting paint on all of these. And again, we're working fairly quickly with the objective that we'll be able to blend some of this all together, especially when we do the claws. We don't have to be super cautious either. We're not going for hyper detailed and perfectionist. It's the other reason I love the contrast paint so much, is they are very forgiving when it comes to that. And I am not super detail orientated. So we're going to kind of get down into here. Just up around the sides a bit. And we're just kind of getting, there we go. So there, very quick, easy underpinning for him. You can already see the details coming up. As I said, we want to be quick. So I'm going to go ahead and do the tips of the little claws now. Skeleton Horde is a nice light shade. And we're just coming in here and we're just kind of blending in all of this. Make those claws kind of pop a bit. For the leg joints, we're just going for the lower tip. Again, we're being pretty heavy-handed with this because we want to make sure to blend it with the gray when I come back. And this is pretty much a test for what I want to do with the Queen and obviously all the rest of the Mirelurks. And I do plan on getting several more of these, so it's just easy to kind of test with ones you're going to be doing multiples of. That way, once they're all in a group, a little more forgiving. We're just kind of doing these little spiky protrusions that he has. On the Queen, these are much easier to see as a more horn piece. And we'll get his crabby claws. Again, trying to work quick because we don't want it to be dry for the other coats. All right, so that's good. So Dunes is a darker shade of the brown. Like I said, we're just doing his top carapace in this. And here where we've got some of this brown from the other one, we'll basically join that all together. And there won't be much of a difference. And especially I want to get in this recesses where his carapace kind of overhangs a bit. Alright, and then finish off the top here. This kind of joint where the arm is not very defined, so it's more going to be for us with the paint to define that particular spot. Generally when I'm doing this, I try to work from lighter to darker because it's easier to fix the light mistakes with the dark. Doing the gray and then having to go back and fix with the brown would not be nearly as easy. Now he's got these little kind of divots in his carapace, so we have to be careful that we are getting paint into them because air bubbles can very easily form. So I want to make sure that I'm getting sufficient. Yeah, there kind of didn't have some coverage in some of these. So we're just gonna work that in a bit more. Even the kind of barnacles and stuff can get air bubbles. So just trying to make sure we've got our paint into all of those recesses. Looking at the edges here. Up and under. A little bit there can be fixed. Alright, looking good. I'm very much a intermediate painter at best, so you won't get any super fancy tips and tricks from me. Just going fast and trying to blend it well. So now we're going to go in here and we're just getting this and kind of blending that brown, especially on that big claw there. You can kind of see I'm going to put some of that gray going up onto the crabby part and see it kind of pulls it naturally. It's the whole thing with using the primer for the contrast paints is it provides a very smooth textured surface, which is perfect for the contrast to flow and be pulled all around, which is what you want. That's the whole point behind contrast, is to utilize the flow and have it do your shading for you. So it's good for this kind of wet blending almost technique. I hesitate to actually call it wet blending simply because we're using contrast paints as opposed to normal. Work down to there. This. Let's just make sure we get all of this on the undercarriage. Blend some of those connection points. And then I'm just going to hit these with the very small residual amount that's on my brush. And really, he's done as far as a base coating goes. You want to review, make sure anywhere that the paint's pulled from, in case you need to apply some more. Right here, I can see up at the top of this one. Just pulled a little down. So we get his leg a bit more on both sides. A little on the top of that claw. And I'm not going for a super heavy amount right now. This is just for fixing. So you don't want to overpower it. But like you can see down in this gap. So we just pull that around. I mentioned the air bubbles before, leaving a bit of a gap in between those barnacles, so fix that. We want to blend that a bit more to dark. Yeah, those claws are looking good. And for now, he's done. What we're going to do next is take some other colors and kind of model them onto the shell and the claws and stuff, and just kind of give him a more detailed look without having to do a lot of detail work. But first we have to let the base coating here dry, and then we will proceed with the next step. Okay, so here we can see we've let our model dry. We've got our basic colors blocked in. Nice little pink flesh undertone there. So now what we're going to do is some stippling work with some other colors to kind of give it a more detailed look. So I'm going to start off with some blue. This may seem a little odd, but then I'm going to work through Majos Purple, bit of Warp Lightning, Blood Angels Red, and finish it off with Gore Grunta Fur. So kind of going up the palette. This is actually recommended on one of the Fallout Wasteland Warfare Facebook groups that I did that came out really well on their Queen, so I'm just testing it on the smaller one before I go full. We're also going to be stippling, so I'm taking an older dry brush I have where the tip's a bit frayed out, and I'm just going to be kind of lightly dabbing this all over. I will not be putting much into the underside because I want to maintain that coloration. So all we're going to do is just kind of go in here and just apply some dots. And it's important to do this quick and to not dry the brush and the paint out much. We're trying to go ahead and blend this together still. So let's keep this going nice and quick. So purple, and I don't want it heavy on the brush, even though I want it to be kind of liquidy. I don't want to, oh yeah, that purple on the dark really blends together. It looks quite good. The blue is the most shocking color in it. The red actually looks pretty good once it gets on the top. It's one of the reasons I'm leaving it as one of the last colors to go in. So the purple is doing a pretty good job, I think, of kind of diluting the blue a bit. And I still want to have my base coloration showing through. The objective here is not to cover it, but to kind of blend and highlight some additional colors just to give it a bit more. If you've ever looked at a lobster, they have a very mottled appearance to them. A lot of different kind of colors blending in. And so that's basically what we're going for here. And there's also why we're ending with the brown, just to try and give it a little more. And this may not look good on our first pass, so we may repeat and we may reorganize the colors. For instance, I find that green a bit off-putting, so I'm going to go ahead and shift the color spectrum a bit if I do another pass and do the purple later. Now I really want this red showing up on the claws and the legs more than anything else. Maybe a little mixed in here and there, but nothing super on the shell. And then the brown's going to be the primary finisher here. So we're going to spend a bit more time with brown and see how we like things coming out here. Alright, so we're just going to start dabbing. Trying to blend this all around. The other thing we're going to do, once we've applied a bit more of this, is do a wash over the whole thing. Again, we're trying to move quick. We don't want the colors to set. And so we kind of want to get this all kind of blended in. All right, so let's some more here, some more around there. We're almost using this as a cover-up for some of the colors. There. All right, now, as I said, for our final top, we're not even going to let these dry before we're going to give it some Agrax Earth Shade over the whole model to act as a blending agent and to just kind of bring all the colors together. Yeah, get that in there. There we go. Get these front legs. What I'm going to do, since I don't want to pull some of these heavier colors into the flesh, is I'm going to do a brush rinse before applying the same onto that, because we want to pull some definition. The contrast paints do a good job of shading, as we can see, but that's and here's the thing, don't be afraid to stop, look at the model, and decide. Yeah, I think I'll go with the wash still. So we're just going to go in here. Yeah, there we go. Nothing too bad. So we're just going in there. And there we go. So now we are going to let this dry, and we will take a look at the end of it and decide if the modeling is where we want it at or if we need to do more. But once you get that top coat over it, really does kind of dull down the brightness, so that, you know, that's why we're using those bright blues and greens, and the reds especially. But yeah, so we will be back once this is dried, and we'll start discussing if we're going to do any detail work and what we're going to do with the base. Alright, so everything's nice and dry now. So our next step is going to be to go ahead and take care of the base. For this, I've gone with a dark gray to go onto the more asphalt pieces. This has like a cracked asphalt with dirt. And then for the dirt itself, I'll be using a brownish yellow, in this case tau light ochre. So the important thing is when mixing, when taking your paints, the dropper bottle ones I tend to drop and then add water, and the objective is to get a nice consistency, almost like skim milk. You can kind of see it doesn't pool up too bad, it's not chunky, and it flows back down. A little harder to see with the gray. And this is just to get a nice smooth coverage without showing any brush strokes. So I'm going to go in here and start kind of edging the pieces here. So this is a raised piece of asphalt, and I don't have to really worry about getting too close to like edges, because the flow on the paint, if you've got it mixed well, will take care of that. Also, I'm not too worried about getting it perfect, because I'll fix any mistakes when I do the dirt. So if I go a little outside the lines, as it were, the dirt itself around it will help fix that. And that I will also be watering just a little bit, just to make sure that it flows. And you can kind of see it flowing. You can almost see the base coat underneath. So this will produce no brush strokes. However, you may have to do 2, sometimes 3 coats, depending on your base color and what pigments you're going on top. Gray I will probably leave with just 1 coat. I'm not super worried about it, as it's the base and it should look just fine. Other times I've done like a blue for armor, and I found that 3 coats even on white is what you need. But again, it's all about how much you've diluted your paint and how much time. If you don't mind having some brush strokes, then you don't need to worry about it. And you can just do 1 coat of heavier paint, and you're good to go. These are all just things to experiment with to find what works for you. So I'm trying to get some of this broken up rock in the middle here. A lot of times, depending on the detail on the base, you may want to paint the model separately, or paint the base and then attach the model. You'll have to analyze your base and make that determination. In this case, since there is literally no other detail than these rocks, I am not too concerned about it. If there was maybe some other detail pieces that were under the Mirelurk that would make a problem to get it, then I might worry, but as it stands, these are fine. And again, so that's the gray, pretty easy. Now for the yellow, it's not in a handy dropper bottle. one of these days I do hope that GW will switch over to using a dropper bottle. So what I will have to do is just take some out with a brush, and GW paints especially, you can see how thick this is. They take a lot of watering down to get to the same level because they have a much higher pigment concentration. I mean, they're great paints, but I prefer mine to be a little more watery in order to get that nice even coat going on. We'll see how that does. Normally I wouldn't let my paint get so far up the brush, but it's not too big of a deal with this. It's an older brush, and I am terrible with brushes, so I actually tend to just buy cheaper brushes. Still Sable, but whatever I can find on sale at my local craft stores, Michael's, whatever. Probably should let this dry a little bit more. Getting some blending, but that's not a big deal. I'm not super worried about it because we're going to go back over this with a brown wash after everything. I will be waiting for the gray to dry, simply because I will apply a dry brushing of light gray on that as well, just to kind of make it pop a bit. I don't find I need to do that with the yellow as much because it will naturally highlight itself once the wash is applied. And here we're just trying to cover up where some of that brown wash we did with the Mirelurk itself. Get that edge. Alright. And that's about all we need. In addition, I'm trying to think of some details to put on these. There's not a huge amount of details. You know, there's the raised pieces on the carapace, the little bumps and stuff. You can hit it with some dry brush if you feel they need to be brought up. Personally, I think they look fine as is. What I do want to do is bring out the eyes. So I have another one that I did as an experiment before this one, and I popped some yellow into the eyes. You can see he's a lot more experimental, and the yellow just isn't popping very well despite everything. So I think we're gonna go with a red. Nice beady red eyes. And that should be the only detail necessary. This is also when, if you want to go back and fix anything. So right now I really like how I got my claws, nice different color. There's some red around there, just a little different. Nothing I really want to fix. If maybe I had some oversplash on the face, then I may, the face, then I may fix that, but looks pretty good. So all I have to do with the eyes is just take some of that red and just drop them into his little holes here. And then once they dry, he should have nice beady red eyes. I was actually thinking about doing green, kind of a glowing green. So I picked up some of the new GW Necron technical paint. But I've got 4 more of these things coming, which means I'll have 4 regulars and then 2 glowing. And I plan on using that for the glowing ones, so I didn't want to really mess that up. So we're going to let this dry, then I will apply some dry brushing and a wash to the base. I will do a very dark gray, almost black for the edging. I do that with all of my bases. So I keep them all nice and uniform. And this is the same paint scheme I use on all my bases as well. So I find that's the most important thing from faction to faction, model to model. If you can keep the basing scheme similar, it'll tie everything together nicely. And I have some play mats that match this color, and it's close enough to the color of the default Wasteland Warfare play mats, so that it, you know, they stand out, but they don't stand out like if you had a complete cobblestone base or something. So making them all kind of flow one to the other, keeping similar colors between them all, helps to tie everything nicely. So once this dries, we'll be back to do some dry brushing and then the final wash. Then we will seal and apply any additional effects to the base we want. Alright, so now we're going to finish up some dry brushing. So this is where the light gray comes in. Just going to do a little bit over the darker gray. So obviously, since we're dry brushing, we don't need to dilute the paint any, because we're only really interested in a very small amount and just getting it barely onto the rocks to basically pick up any highlights. Very simple technique. That'll give us our shading a bit. Alright. And then we're going to take our Agrax Earthshade or any other brown wash you may be fond of and just apply it to the base. And that should finish us up for this one. Now, this is a gloss as opposed to the normal Agrax that I use, simply because I messed up and bought the wrong kind. It doesn't actually matter, really. It will have a bit of a sheen to it to begin with, but once I apply my sealants, that will not matter anymore. So the sealants I use a Tester's gloss coat, followed by Tester's dull coat over that once it's dried. And that dull coat will knock off the shine from both the gloss coat, which is a stronger sealant, and from the wash. So, and that is it. And then those eyes have dried nicely. So let's see if we can catch that. So he's got his red beady little eyes under there. Hard to see with the light, but they do show pretty well. So I'm going to let the wash dry. I will paint the rim a dark gray and then seal, and we'll have it back for finishing. Okay, so our models are now nicely sealed. You can see the shine is taken off with just some dull coat on there. It's getting a little bit of glare off the camera, but nothing too terrible. So what we're going to do is finish up the bases now. I've got two types of finisher I'm using currently. First is the Army Painter Highland Tufts. You can see they're very brownish, so they work well for Wasteland. And then I came across these recently, which are by a company called Pico Scene. These are static grass, what do they call them? Sandy grass tufts. So the difference is the Army Painter ones are just the tufts, and if you can see these, you see these kind of have a bit of sand attached to a lot of them. So they're good for giving a bit more depth. The only issue is you then have to apply a bit more brown wash as you used on your base, just to kind of blend them in. So I usually work with a pair of tweezers. So I've got my Army Painter ones that came in a set. These are decent ones, nothing fancy. The ones you have in your bathroom will probably work just as well. And then I just use regular old white glue. PVA glue, as some people will call it, scenic glue. It's just your regular elementary school paste-eating glue. So I just apply a little bit on the bottom. Doesn't even have to really cover the whole thing. Go kind of smidge it around. And then what I'm going to do is you look at it and just decide, okay, I want to apply it here to where it's just kind of blending in with the ground. And then I'm going to take another one. And the one from Pico, they're all pretty much the same size. There are some larger ones, but otherwise most of them are kind of a medium size, whereas the Army Painter ones get some that are pretty small. Now, since I applied that one over there, I'm going to go ahead and, for the second guy, just kind of pop that there in the front. And this helps, since they are on identical bases, it helps to give them a little bit of differentiation. And then these are larger base. These are like the 32, maybe 40 millimeter bases. So I generally stick with one tuft on the normal bases, whereas these larger ones I'll go to 1 or 2. And again, just trying to change it up. So what I'll do, since I'm using a small one of the Army Painter ones, I'll just throw that there. And there, I have just some nice scrub going on. And then for the other one, I'll also go with another small tuft. And I generally try and align them to the dirt or to cracks between major portions of the stone. So the stonework on this doesn't really have what I think would be a suitable spot to throw any. So I'm just going to put this, the back has a bit of dirt there, so we'll just kind of blend that in. Now, you may be wondering why I did not put these on prior to sealing. If you put them on and then seal the miniature, they will adhere to the miniature quite well. However, they will also basically thicken up. They'll pick up all of the moisture from the sealant and turn very coarse and brittle almost. It's not a very good look, so it's worth doing that. Now for those two, I need to go ahead and apply my earth shade. There we go. Always try and have your paints laid out better than I do. Now this is not the gloss one, because I'm not going to have the opportunity to go back and fix it with the sealant like I did. And all I'm trying to do is go in and hit the coloration, kind of blend the bottom of it, so you can kind of see there. We're just trying to blend the bottom color into coloration. I'm making up words as I talk, aren't I? Alright, so that will just allow it to match. And the other one, I'm going to do the same thing. And all we're trying to do is hit that dirt pile that comes on it. Just blend it into the base a bit. We'll tone down the colors. Alright, and that is that. I may do some more painting videos. I may do, because I'm going to focus on the Queen next, I think, because I love painting giant things. And this was pretty good practice, I think. So this is the first one I did, and I darkened the under a bit more than I like. But his shell is nicely modeled, I think. And this is the one I painted primarily on camera. So he's got a paler undercoat. Also need to look into getting a better camera and an overhead setup if I keep doing these. But this is just for fun. Alright, so hopefully some of those tips helped, and we'll upload something new hopefully next week.